The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Data Catalogs Fail Without Governance. In today's presentation, we'll be addressing the four main questions about data. What is it called? What does it mean? Where can I find it? And can I trust it? During today's presentations, we'll be using the Irwin DIS catalog, and like many catalogs, it has a lot of great features. We will be focusing in depth on the relationship between data catalogs and data governance and showing how an organization can leverage a data governance framework. I would like to start with a couple of introductions today. Our key speaker is Jeff Giles. Jeff is Sandhill's enterprise architect and has been a long-time enterprise architect data governance specialist who's been addressing the issue of providing a unified approach to data modeling, data governance, and data cataloging. You are, of course, listening to Robert Lutton, Vice President, Sandhill Consultants, and I will be your MC for today's session. Just a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, and we will have that recording available in the next day or so. You can post any questions into the Q&A section on the little dashboard on the right-hand side, as well as use the chat feature, and hopefully at the end of the session, we'll have time to address them. And on that note, let me bring in Jeff to kick it off. Jeff, over to you.
Thank you, Robert. I think I'd like to start off, as Robert mentioned, data cataloging software is pretty prevalent these days. As a matter of fact, more and more organizations are adopting data catalogs to help with their issues they have with data management. Now, some of the promises of the data catalog is that it'll help you with your data discovery. It'll help you with analytics. It'll help you make better business decisions. It'll make you more productive, and you'll be more agile. Now, all of these things are true. However, there is a component that you need to address in order to make this stuff work, and that is the data governance component. So simply buying a box of software does not get you everything you need. What you really need to look at is the integration of data governance and data management over your data assets. So when we think about a data catalog, it's a collection of metadata that helps the users find the data they need. Data governance, on the other hand, is a set of processes ensuring important data assets are formally managed for trustworthiness and accountability. So you can think of it this way, is that data governance is sort of an oversight on top of data management to make sure that the data is in fact being managed according to some policy, process, or standard. And these are the things that aren't actually in software offerings. It's true that they have the infrastructure to relate certain things together, and they have places where you can put this information. However, you still have to develop your own policies, how you want to handle things through your processes, as well as adopt the standards that are going to work best for you. So as Robert said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a data catalog and a product called Compass to illustrate how data governance works on top of a data catalog. And I'm looking at four basic questions. These are just generalized questions, but certainly questions that the business wants answers to. And the first is, what is it called? What did you name that thing? What does it mean? So once I see it, what can I derive from that? And then where can I find it? And then finally, can I trust it once I actually find it? So what we're going to do is just start off with the first question, which is, what is it called? So the data catalog, at its very rudimentary functionality, should be able to enable users to find the data they need. So a data catalog can contain metadata from lots of different sources. But one of the problems that you have is that people name things differently. So for instance, if I were trying to find date of birth of a person or something, it might be defined as date of birth. It could be birthday, it could be birth date, it could be DOB. So there's lots of different ways that people will name data. And when you have all these different mechanisms for naming data, both technically as well as business, it makes it harder to find the information you're looking for. So one of the key tenets of data governance is setting standards. And so one of the standards that's pretty popular for data names is an ISO standard that's called 11179. Now 11179 is part of a family of metadata standards, but this one happens to be about naming. And I've sort of just generalized it here. Inside the specification, there's a whole lot more details to it, but essentially, when we start to name things, we should have some kind of structure that we follow when naming. So for instance, we could have a prime word, a qualifying word, and a classifying word. So the example here is we have products, there are quantities of products, and that quantity is expressed as a number. So when I read this from left to right, I can guess or derive some meaning from this just by the name alone. Even if I don't have the definition, I have a pretty good idea of what that actually means. Part of the problem with this is, of course, sometimes you get data from external sources or you have legacy data and it was named something else. And you can't just go in and start changing names of things because then it begins to make a bigger mess. So then you have to think about, how am I going to manage synonyms or aliases within my data catalog? So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to jump into a short demonstration here and talk about how we can address this naming with data catalogs. So I'll just move this out of the way. Now, the first product that I'm going to talk about here is called Compass. Now, this is a Sandhill product, and what it is it's a data governance management system. So what we have encountered in talking with people is that they want to start a data governance program, but they're not exactly sure how to get it off the ground. So one of the things that Compass does for you, even before you even buy a data catalog, is to start thinking about the things you need in a data catalog. So if I start with policies and standards, we can see that there are a couple or quite a few policies that are already in Compass itself. Now, these policies are policies that would fit lots of different industries, whether you're in finance or banking or retail. Having a data policy around data use or data integration or security, these are all important policies to have. So when I look at a policy, a lot of this stuff is template driven, so I can have it defined by its descriptions, its purpose, scope, details around the policy itself. In addition to looking at policies, I would probably want to know about certain standards as well. So I can click on standards here and I can see that there's some standards. So we've also got data security standards. So when I look at this, I can have a description of the data security standard and I can look into that in more detail. In addition to that, there's information here around setting up your data governance structure. So governance management talks about this idea of stewardship. So another one of the tenets of data governance is having an organization where you have people who are actually going to do the work of stewarding data, as well as reviewing the data. So you should have some understanding of how you want to handle a workflow when you're reviewing things. So you should have a detail about different roles that data stewards are going to play, as well as some structure on how the flow of decision-making is going to happen at the data governance level. So these are the things that you're generally interested in understanding before you even start filling out the software or actually adding information to the software. The other things are business glossaries. Probably one of the first things that people do when setting up data governance. And within a business glossary, I might want to understand, what do we actually have to do to build it? So there's a playbook concept within data governance, which says that we have to plan for the glossary first, identify the data elements that we're going to put in it, create some structure or hierarchy or taxonomy around it, define the standards that we want to have for putting in glossary terms, definitions, identify who is going to be accountable and responsible for the business glossary, and then the operating procedures such as compliance, make sure that something is to standard. And then what are the success matrix or mechanisms that tell us whether we're doing a good job or not within the business glossary. And then finally, last is to actually select a tool to host and manage your business glossary. So these are some of the things that you want to be aware of before you even begin building out a data governance program. And these are some of the things that Compass helps you with. Now, on the side of tooling, this is the Data Intelligence Suite by Quest, and it has a number of different modules in it. And this module that we're in right now is what's called the Data Literacy module. And this is the area by where you would start to put your business terms. So if I use Compass as guidance, one of the things that it tells me in the playbook anyway, is that I should have some kind of taxonomy or organizational structure. So when I start looking at this, I can see, okay, I have got a structure for people and organizations. Oop, got to sign back in. People and organizations, that's where I left off. And then within people and organizations, there's a concept of a party. And then within parties, I can have persons. And within persons, I can find that person birth date. Person being the primary term, date being the classifying word, and then birth is the modifying word. So I can see, I can look through this structure and find information simply by drilling through the different taxonomy that I have here. In addition to that, there's a section within called Discover Assets. And within the Discover Assets, I can look through business terms, I can look through columns, I can look through everything if I'd like for certain words. So let's say, for instance, I'm interested in looking through columns for the birth date. So I just have to type in birth and then do a search, and I can come up with a birth date. So these are different systems that contain this concept of birth, but you'll notice in here inside of my loan systems, there's something called birth incorporation date. This is why it's important to name things so that people can understand what they are. And then later on, we'll talk about defining things so we understand what they mean. But I'm able to go through this information and find the associated details. If I want to change it back to, let's say, business terms, I can go and I can see I've got my person birth date, and I can drill into that. Now you'll notice here that under miscellaneous, there are also tags. So as I mentioned before, there may be synonyms or aliases that people still use within the organization, and you can put them in as tags. So if somebody searches for birthday or DOB or date of birth, they'll come back to the same business term. You'll also see here that I've got classification structure for security as well as data governance. Remember, I said that within your data governance program, you should have some idea of data stewardship, and you should also know who's going to be responsible and accountable for things within your data catalog. Now, one of the things that this data catalog does is that you have the ability to take a look at your data governance structure. So within my business glossary, I can look at my data governance structure here. And so when I look at this, I can see that I have to have some governance responsibilities. So my governance is broken down into business stewardship, data ownership, technical data stewardship. You can have any number of different classifications or organizational structures for this. But what I'd like to know is simply, when I look at business data steward, I can say that that's the big classification, and I can have a sub role within that. And then I can have a person who's actually playing the role of the data steward. And then I can see what that data steward is responsible for. So listings of certain business terms like parties and person. I know that this person is responsible for that business area. I also know that this person is responsible for 3 data governance policies and 2 data governance standards. So on that note, one of the things that I also want to be able to do is I'd like to know essentially where I can find the standards that relate to certain things. So within my business rules here, I can see that I've got my data procedures and I have my data standards. So within my data standards, I want to be able to see what standards are available when it finally talks to the database. I'll wait for a sec. I also have procedures in here as well. Now you could separate them out with separate section for procedures and a separate section for standards. I have them both within this one catalog. What my data standards here will tell me what are the confidentiality standards. This one is the metadata naming standard, so then I can come in here and see that there is a metadata naming standard. There's a definition for it. There's a specification for it as well. And you can also embed a hyperlink so that you can go back out to the specification, or you could go back out to Compass if you wanted to, if that was your area where the details could be found. So I can get my standards here for naming right within my data catalog. So with that, Robert, do you have any feedback for me?
Jeff, thanks. The way that you present this, I'm seeing that the Irwin data catalog allows organizations to visualize the metadata brought in from many sources, and it's a way to pull that information in and define and show the assets what they're doing. It also allows you to create a taxonomy. It was great to see the business terms and look at the data governance structure and find the standards. But I do have a question. I hear you saying that it's of critical importance that the organization needs to establish the processes, the policies, the standards for data governance to be able to define these terms and what who's got the responsibility and authority to work with the data. The information that you showed, does the catalog come with all that content that you showed there?
That's a very good question. The answer is no. It doesn't come up. It does not have anything that's pre-built in the catalog as far as RACI, that is, who's responsible for what are the roles. There are no policies, there are no standards pre-built in there. So oftentimes that is the part that takes the most amount of time. when you think about setting up a data catalog, it's fairly easy to go to IT and have them sort of roll out the data catalog and make it available. And it's fairly easy to find your different data sources and start stuffing all of this metadata into your data catalog. But without the governance, of course, it's just a lot of metadata that's not actually being managed. And it is the data governance side of the house that actually takes the most amount of time to set up.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, with that, we'll jump into the next section here. And this is all about the question of what does it mean? So like I said, when I was searching through my catalog, I did find this thing called birth incorporation date, which I'm not sure what that means. So that's this part of the equation. Now, the idea here is that when you start adding different data element names in, a lot of it is contextual. That is, when I use a word like service, it could mean different things to different people in different contexts. So the important thing that you want to understand here is that there must be an agreement when you start to build these terms, right? Everybody has to agree that the name is consistent and has a consistent meaning. So if we look at these examples here, I could say the Boston to Washington Express train service runs on weekdays. So a scheduling concept. And then I could say the service to Boston is now boarding. Breakfast service is available in business class. All staff have been trained on customer service. The train is unavailable while undergoing service. While the train is in service, its location can be tracked on the app. It's the same word, but lots of different contexts. So these are things that within a business glossary and a data catalog, you have to be very cognizant of. So when we start taking a look at meaning, one of the things that I run into is that in the definition of a term, there tends to be the embedding of policy, rules, process, as well as the term definition, all in the same definition, which from a best practices perspective is not a good idea. So here's an example. This is a definition that the customer had, and when I looked at it, I read through it, and there was a lot of stuff in here, but a lot of the stuff in here had to do with policies and procedures and standards and various other things that didn't really need to be in the definition. So this is one of the things that you can get in trouble with if you start to populate your business glossary with definitions that you just find out on the web and you stick them in your business glossary without any kind of governance, without somebody looking at the definition and saying, well, I don't agree with this definition, or this definition has more stuff in it than it needs to have. So when we break this down, there's policy stuff, there's rules stuff, but the term sales order isn't really defined. So you should have some mechanism, some way of looking at your definitions so that you can get a good, concise, clear definition. Generally, you want to have one, maybe two sentences as your definition. So when we look at sales order, we're really saying it's a kind of order, because it could be a sales order, it could be a purchase order, or it could be a number of different kinds of orders, because an order is really just a type of agreement that has terms and conditions. So we know that it has some characteristics, and then it's used for selling goods or services. So when somebody's trying to do analytics and they look for a sales order, they can get the information they need about the sales order, not be encumbered with policies and procedures and various other things that is not of any value to the person doing data analytics. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump back into the data intelligence suite here and show how we can deal with some of these definitional things. So in my business terms area here, I'll go back into my business terms. And I'll search for address. And I can find address. Now, when I look at address over here, you can see that there are 18 associations. So what we're saying here is that address itself is actually associated with lots of different things. It could be associated with another business term. That is, if my business term has a classification structure such as address, address can actually be a contact address, an electronic address, a party postal address, a geographic boundary. These are all concepts of address. So when I start looking at my definitions and start to see how I'm structuring my business glossary, I want to think about things like what kinds of or types of terms I've got. I can also say, okay, well, is it related to any business policies? And I could see that it's related to a number of different policies, and one of those is a data access policy because it falls under the security label. It falls under data access policy. So this gets to that concept where I'm trying to separate out what is a policy from what is the meaning of that particular term. And then I can look at it in the concept of, are there any business rules associated with this as well? And so it's associated with a metadata naming standard. So there's standards associated with this with the United States Postal Service. So when we start looking at the definition side of things, I want to be cognizant of how I associate these different things together. Now, if I were to go into this and look at something called a mind map, what I'm able to do is I'm able to see that here's address and here's the business term structure. So for an address, it could have a logistical structure or it could have an organizational structure for people. And if I drill into this, I could see that it's a way of parties to communicate with one another. And then these are the different types, contact, electronic, party. Logistically, this is where we start talking about actually on the earth. So facilities and locations for a geographic location for an address, which actually might be a latitude and longitude coordinate. And then shipments, a ship to customer, a ship to purchase. So these are all concepts that are associated with the address. And like I said before, with the tagging structure, you can search for things on different ways to look at them. And then of course, there's the data standards, metadata naming standards, US Postal Service, and policies. So in this case, I've separated out what is a policy, what is a standard, what do you call it, or what is its alias from the actual definition and concept of what that business term is. So let me jump back here. And actually, before I do that, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was this idea of a workflow. So if I jump into address, you can see here I've got a workflow status. And if I go to the workflow log, then I can see where this is in the workflow. So one of the things, like I said, that's kind of important is that if you don't have any way to determine whether something is compliant or whether something meets a certain standard, then you don't really have any governance, because this is the governance part of it. And this is where I want to know who are the users or the roles. So data stewardship, actual people playing the roles. So it's important for me to understand who is responsible or informed or consulted in the different stages of my workflow. So this is where the governing part of governance sort of comes in. to looking at those types of things. So on that note, I'll pop back out here. And Robert, do you have any feedback for me on
Yeah,
the definition?
I was looking the urban DIS, the Data Intelligence System catalog, has got outstanding capabilities, and it allows the organization to review the data governance information on policies, definitions, workflow, and in business terms. And even, as you saw, visualize the association between business terms and rules. However, as you mentioned, the data catalog initially comes empty of all that content. And it's the data governance that allows the organization to deliver this holistic approach to govern the data catalog, to define the workflow, and to identify the responsibilities, as you mentioned. Is there anywhere in the data governance system that can explain or show how to qualify a definition? Is that something that you've got in your in the data governance system?
Well, not initially.
Well,
You'd have to.
If you go to the your Compass system, I saw something under Business Glossary where you do that qualified business term, and I was really kind of looking to sort of say, is that something that you can use and leverage to help the user understand, how you go by? Because when you pull a business term into the data catalog, how did this business term come into being? What was the standard around this process? I'm wondering if you might be able to talk to that.
Sure. There is a section in Compass about qualifying a business term. So the idea around qualifying a business term is understanding what are the things I'm going to use when I'm doing that review process. Because if you remember in the workflow, I said, okay, well, here's address, and it's in the workflow, and it's at a certain stage. And within a certain stage, I believe review was one of the options. So when you've assigned somebody to do the review of a business term, let's say it is a business person or some kind of subject matter expert, they may want some guidance on how do I actually go through this review process. Is there a checklist or something for me I'm supposed to be looking at? So one of the things that Compass does is it does have this idea of what process I might go through to look at qualifying whether that business term meets a certain standard. And you can actually have it in Compass, and you can also put your own Word documents or other associated documents in here as well, so that you can see, have a quick reference to that. You could also take the same documents that you store in here, and you could look at them in terms of stewardship. So if I'm reviewing a steward, if I'm a steward reviewing something, then I can use what I found in Compass, and I can actually place it in here and illustrate how the definition structure should look, how we handle generalization within certain things. So yes, you're right, Robert. None of that best practices information is part of a data catalog. You actually have to supply that.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's take a look at the third question, which is where can I find it? So, when you're looking at information as it's stored within your organization, it can be scattered in lots of different places. So many different places that you don't even know where it is. But you know that you want to have, let's say, a 360-degree view of something, a product or a customer or something. So you want to be able to hit as many different data sources as you can to make sure you get the appropriate perspective for that piece of information you're looking for. There's also information that is stored externally as well. You want to make sure that you also incorporate that in your search for information. So here I'm just going to pop back into the Data Intelligence Suite and show how we can answer that question as well. So like I showed you before with this concept of address, is that when I'm in address, certainly I have all of this information, but I also want to know, technically, where can I find this information? So back to that mind map, if I expand the whole thing, what we can see here is the right side, which I've already talked about. But now on this left side, this is all the technical resources for address. Different systems that it's stored in, the actual name that it's using. These red padlocks will tell us whether in that particular system it's been flagged as being a security issue. In other places, maybe not. So maybe I need to talk to somebody about those kinds of things. But the idea here is that in front of me, I get this expanded view of where it came from over here on the left side. And over here is what does it mean and what is it called? So in one view, I'm able to look at all the different sources that I have for the address information. So if I come back here, Robert, do you have any feedback for me on the locations information?
I just thought, Jeff, I was, watching, and it's really great to see how, the Urban Data Catalog allows the understanding of how everything relates together, and it keeps everything in nice separate areas, such as the policies and standards, and yet they're linked to the data governance solution. So really, when you think about it, we're really showing how not only to bring the data catalog and launch the data catalog, but also launch this governance into the product as well. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you probably are noticing about these two things is that they are complementary, where governance itself is really a people-driven concept, a people-driven idea. And then the catalog itself has all that infrastructure that lets you link and synchronize and associate things together. So governance by itself is a difficult task to do if you don't have something to help support that, like a cataloging tool. And of course, the inverse, which is what we're talking about today, I could have the greatest data cataloging tool ever made, but if I don't have any governance on top of it, well, it's really just going to be a heap of metadata thrown in with no way to manage it. So then nobody actually trusts it, which gets me to the next or the last question, which is, can I trust this information? Sure, I know where it came from. Sure, I know what it means, and I know what it's been called, but can I trace this through its entire journey? So the key to developing a data-centric culture is to share trusted data across the organization. Data lineage is the mechanism by which we can trace the information and we can actually see what happens to it along its data journey. So we have kind of an audit trail for looking at what happened to the data. So what I'm going to do here is take a look at lineage in respect to the data cataloging tool, but I'm also going to talk about this idea of measuring success within the data catalogs. So trust, obviously I have this set of information here, but it's over here on the left-hand side that I want more details. Yes, it's true. I know address can be found here, but what I really want is a more detailed audit trail of this information. So there's a section in the Data Intelligence Suite, which is called the Metadata Manager. So the Metadata Manager has all kinds of information about lineage and impact analysis. So over here on the left-hand side, these are all my different metadata assets, if you will. This is really a data dictionary. And if you look at it, the way that it's structured is there's a top-level organization called a system. And then within a system, you can have a series of what are called environments. And then within an environment, then you can have sets of tables. And then within the tables, then I can actually see the actual columns themselves. So I can do sort of a drill down. Now, if I'm looking at the top level and I want to know what is the data lineage for this, I can click data lineage, and then what it will tell me is it says, this item here with the dashed line around it, that's where you are right now. But there are things upstream and downstream of you. So there are 3 different sources that are downstream feeding into this one data warehouse, which in turn feeds this loan reporting. So I have an idea of how data travels through these different things. But I can also look at it at the environment level. And at the environment level, when I start to look at data lineage, I get to see a little bit more detail that within each one of these systems, maybe 1 or more different environments that are all loading into the warehouse, and that this warehouse has this area called staging, and then an area that's loading, and then a report called risk reporting. Then I can actually get into more detail and do lineage at this level, where I get even more detail, where I'm starting to see the table structures, and then finally down to the column level lineage, where I'm actually able to see that, okay, there's a concatenation of these green fields here to this one field that's feeding into that integration for customer loans that actually gets me to this thing called ADRS underscore line 1. So I have even more details. But the other part of this is, what is the impact of any kind of change or modification on this structure? So there's impact analysis at the different levels. So there's system level impacts, environment level impacts, table level, column level, and then impacts that might be related to SQL or lookups or business rules. So if I want to look at the downstream impacts for this particular thing, it'll actually tell me name of system, name of environment, name of table, name of column. And if it happens to be in a project, it'll tell me what the name of that project is. Now, sometimes I want to get down even lower, and I might want to see what the source SQL is for any kind of transformations. And that happens at what's called the mapping manager level. So if I look at my data catalog, there's a section in here called mapping manager. Now, mapping manager gives me more details around exactly what transformations are taking place. So when I look at this particular mapping, what I can see is that from a graphical perspective, this is the detailed lineage, but I can even see right down to the source extract SQL what actual transformations are happening during that process. So I can follow this in as much detail as I need to see how this information travels along its journey. And like I said, this is more about building out a kind of audit trail for things. So when we start doing data governance, one of the things that you want to be aware of is how well are we doing data governance? So you want to be able to have some metrics or measures so that you can report that all the effort that we're doing with this data governance stuff has some sort of result that we can manage. So, you know, the age-old business expression, you can't manage what you don't measure. So one of the things that you can see inside of Compass was that there are some graphs and charts around completion rates and schedules and performance that might influence your data cataloging efforts. And you can build within this product compliance reports. So different kinds of compliance reports: business asset compliance, data quality compliance, technical metadata compliance, So if I looked at this one, then I might want to be able to see how many columns were classified as sensitive, but without a governance policy, right? So these are things that you would want to make sure that you are looking at and actually qualifying for building out a particular dashboard to see how well you're doing. So here, different domains, top assets that we have, trend for creating business terms, business policies, and various other things that are all affected by those compliance reports that you have to think about what the metrics are going to be before you actually get into the tool, because the tool itself will let you design whatever kinds of reports you want. But thinking about what kind of metrics you want up front is very, very useful. Like Robert says, this stuff doesn't come pre-populated in the product. Do you have any feedback for me on that one, Robert?
Jeff, as you mentioned, data catalogs are great tools. That's why there's such an interest in them today. It allows organizations to know where the data is, understand how the data flows, see the lineage, and how the data moves on its data journey. However, right at the beginning, you talked about the promise of the data catalog to be able to deliver trust. And
Right.
it's only by having a data governance program that sits on top of the data catalog are organizations able to meet that promise that you talked about today. So
Yes.
that's what I would say is that they're great tools, but as you say, they're empty and they need a governance program. And for organizations that don't have that, that's what we think is needed on top of that, as you've mentioned before.
Yes. So let me just wrap this up with a few, with a quick summary here. We looked at the 4 basic questions. And like I said, these questions are just generalized questions of questions that business users generally want to know. So when we think about what it's called, we have to have some standards so that we can consistently name things the same way. We also need to manage synonyms, right? Because I could have date of birth, birth date, birthday, all kinds of different synonyms, but I've only got one term that's the actual meaning. So I need to be able to manage those different synonyms. And we looked at tagging in the DIS product, which leads us to what does it mean? Because once I have figured out what it's called, I want to understand what it means. And of course, the most important thing when it comes to meaning is the context in which you're looking at things, right? Like we had said that you can have an address, but that address might be an electronic address, or it might be a physical address on the planet. It's important that I don't get those two concepts mixed up, because my report might be different, or whatever it is I'm looking for could be completely different. The other thing in meaning is not to take a definition and start to embed things like policies and processes and standards in that definition. The best practice is to separate out what is a policy, what is a process, what is a standard, and then associate those with the definition. That way, if a policy ever changes or a process changes, you don't have to go into your business glossary and start to modify those things. You can manage them all separately. And then where can I find it? So now I understand what it means and I want to run a report on it. So where is it located in the vast array of data sources and storage areas that I have around my organization? I should be able to use the data catalog to find out where all those things are, even if they have a different name than what I'm particularly looking for, because they're already associated. And then lastly, the trust concept. Trust, as Robert said, comes with knowing that this stuff's governed. Like I said, I can take lots of metadata from different sources and I can stuff it in my catalog. I can go out to the web, I can copy and paste a bunch of definitions into my business glossary, and I could say, yep, I've got a data catalog. But in reality, you just have a collection of metadata. You don't have a governed collection of metadata, which includes the workflow, the RACI, the roles, making sure that what's in there is supposed to be in there and is of a certain level of quality, because once you can do that, then you can actually trust it. And if you can trust it, you'll use it. So when we say data catalogs fail without data governance, what we're saying is you can roll it out, you can put stuff in there, but people won't use it if they don't trust it. They'll start to do their own shadow IT or their own shadow data cataloging operation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert for his remarks.
Yeah, and there's a couple of questions. We'll get to them in a couple of minutes. I just wanted to, reiterate that as much as we think they do, data catalog tools don't come out of the box ready to govern data. They certainly have the necessary capabilities, but they don't include what we've shown: the governance processes, the policies, the races, the structure, the definitions, the workflow, and all of that must be put in place. Whether you've already got a data catalog and you're sort of figuring out that, yeah, okay, I don't have that information and I need that information, or whether you're about to embark upon a data catalog and we're telling you, hey, that's great, but the data catalog is the end, not the beginning. You should have your approach all figured out, your policies and procedures and things like that. Only by having an approach of a data governance program which provides the oversight, right? Then you'll be able to address the 4 questions that that this presentation's all about, and Jeff mentioned on the previous screen. Jeff, just hit the next slide. Delivering on the promise of data catalogs. So the question we really have for our audience, and we'll follow up with you, is that do you need to deliver on the promise of data catalogs? And if your end destination is to successfully govern and manage your data catalog, hopefully it's an Irwin data catalog or something else, and you'd like to learn more about Sandhill's data governance management system, you can feel free to reach back to the email here on the screen. We'll get a hold of that, and obviously reach back to any of us at Sandhill as well. So with that, there are a couple of questions that I'm just going to bring up. So Jeff, bear with me. We answered some of them as we were going through, and Richard has been very prolific on the answers or questions there as well. So we'll have a sidebar conversation with Richard. But Emery, you had asked a question. When you give examples of best practices for writing policy, could you describe where the best practices reside? I think, Jeff, that might be more of a Compass-enabled question rather than a Irwin DIS-enabled question.
Right, because when we had looked at this, we mentioned that you can put your best practices in Compass, and Compass would be a ready resource so that you can find the information. As a matter of fact, you can actually use the things sort of in conjunction with one another. Like if I looked at my business policies here, and I looked at my data access policy, my data access policy has got a hyperlink back into Compass. So the idea here is that you can have best practices and any other kind of reference information that you can pop back in here and see the details of it as well. And if you wanted to begin to sort of keep some things in your library of documents, you could do that within these data intelligence tools here. All support this idea of capturing PDFs and Word documents and Excel spreadsheets too.
And is there anything in Compass that can help with defining how you create your data governance policies or anything like that?
Yes, there is actually. If we go back to policy, there's a policy overview, which is sort of a general view of what policies are, some ideas about the scope.
I think you're in the business glossary section, Jeff.
Oh, I'm sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Hang on a sec. policies and standards. Here we are. So when I start looking, I should have to go back to the framework here. Hang on, I've got myself twisted up.
Yeah, so you were right. Go into data governance policies and standards.
Yeah, and then there should be an overview section in here.
Number 1 and number 2. Number 1 and number 2. You can, the third item.
Oh, there it is. I was looking for it here. Okay. Yes, there it is. So the policy overview, which covers things like different kinds of policies that you have around the different topical areas, such as the business glossary, governance management, authorities, and things like that are all defined within Compass itself.
And just last question, Mike had asked us, is Compass a template for Irwin DI catalog, or is it a complementary solution?
It's a complementary solution. Even though we use the Irwin Data Intelligence Suite as sort of an example of a data catalog, you could have easily have used Elation or Calibra or Informatica as your data catalog, because the concepts are the same. And Compass itself is sort of an overarching concept that straddles all the different vendors for building out data catalogs.
Excellent. Jeff, thank you very much indeed. Our audience, thank you very much indeed. We have recorded this one. We will send you the link in the next day or so. If you need to reach out to us, you'll obviously have our emails. Please feel free to do so. And I'd just like to thank Jeff for creating this presentation. Data catalogs fail without governance. You need governance. Hopefully that message has come in loud and clear. And we look forward to hearing from our audience in the near future. And Jeff, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thank you all for attending.
Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.